This is my favorite $150 speaker. And this is my favorite $1,500 speaker. 10 times as much as this one. So today we're going to talk about whether a $150 speaker can compete with a $1,500 speaker. We're going to talk about build quality. We're going to talk about sound quality. We're going to talk about all of it. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about whether this $150 speaker is going to shock the world and beat a $1,500 speaker. Probably won't. Let me refer to my notes. That's right, I went old school. Oh man, the fan just flopped it over. Okay, back to it. All right, these are two of my favorite speakers. Just kidding. The Sony SSC S5 comes in at $150 on sale. Used to be like $150 retail, and it would go on sale for $80. However, tomorrow, that's right, is Amazon Prime Day, which means if these speakers go on sale, they will be on sale tomorrow. So if you're in the market for the Sony SSC S5 and you have $150 to spend, well, I don't think you can spend your money much better than the Sony SSC S5. The other speaker that is my favorite is the Sonos Faber Lumina 2 Amateur, handmade in Italy. The Sony's not handmade in Italy. They're made in China. Talk about some specs. I just checked, and the Sonys are $148 right now. They may go to, I don't know, $126 maybe tomorrow, whenever you're watching this video. If it's the 8th, what is it? If it's the 8th and 9th of October and it's Amazon Prime Days, chances are these are probably around $130. These have a 3¼ inch super tweeter, a 1-inch soft dome tweeter, and a 5¼ inch paper-ish cone woofer. 6 ohm nominal impedance. And I don't know what their efficiency is. Yes, I do. It's 87 dB. However, the Sonos Faber Lumina 2 Amateurs have a stated sensitivity of 86 dB. When I was listening to both of these at the same time, and we will get into how I did the evaluation, the Sonos Fabers actually sounded louder than the Sonys. And the Sonos Fabers have a lower sensitivity. So there may be some liberal usage of the sensitivity. It's not that far off. Sonos Faber have a nominal impedance of 4 ohms, while the Sonys have a nominal impedance of 6 ohms. So on paper, the Sonos Fabers are supposedly harder to drive than the Sonys. Are close enough. Sonos Faber has a 29mm DAD high definition driver. I think that's code for tweeter, and 150mm paper cone driver. So these things, size-wise, spec-wise, are more similar than one would think. Okay, this is where the 10x price difference starts to be fairly obvious. I don't know if it's 10x better, but it's quite a bit better. Sony's lighter. This is more kind of like a shoebox style of a speaker. Rear port, binding post down here. The binding posts actually aren't bad at all for the price of this speaker. You have some molding around. Right here you have kind of like a plastic molding that sets in, kind of ties everything together. But these speakers, well, they feel like, you know what the funny thing is? They feel like maybe a $200-300 speaker. I've handled a lot of cheap speakers, and these really aren't that bad. Frankly, when I compare these to something like a PSB audio, the lowest tier PSB, Sony's actually built a little bit better, and I've pulled these things apart, and there's actually pretty decent internal bracing and a decent crossover for what this thing is. It has a vinyl wrap around it and a little bit textured to it. Nothing special. $150 speaker. This, on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, is a beautiful, look at the baffle. It's a hardwood, I think a Baltic birch style front baffle. Hardwood. Then you have a wrap around the sides, the top, and it's kind of like a fake, it's a leatherette. It's a fake leather wrap. Beautiful drivers. Bottom port down here. Metal. Here you have some texture on the back. Very nice binding post. You can bi-amp, bi-wire these. And on the bottom you have kind of like a spongy, I don't know, corky, rubbery little base. Do they feel 10 times better than the Sonys? Well, they certainly feel 5 times better than the Sonys. And I've handled a lot of $500 speakers. The Sonus Faber Lumina 2 Amateurs are a lot better. Yeah, sure, they're 10 times better. Yes. How I evaluated these speakers. It's kind of easy, especially if you have a Weem Pro streamer or a Weem Ultra streamer. What I did was I connected the Sonus Faber to the left speaker, the Sony to the right speaker. I went into the device settings on the Weem Ultra. I changed it from stereo output to mono output, and then I just did the slider. Lefty-loosey all the way over to the Sonus Faber, righty-tighty all the way over to the Sony SSCS5. And then real time, you can go back and forth, and then you just kind of go like this, face in front of the Sonus Faber, go like this, face in front of the Sony, and you can tell a lot about the tonality of the speaker, the sensitivity of the speaker, the resonance of the speaker. However, you lose the magic because, well, these are stereo speakers. They come in pairs of 2. They come with 1 pair, and they're meant to be used together. So, while listening in mono does tell you a bit about the speaker, it doesn't tell the entire story. I had the Weem Ultra going digital out to the Gishelli Labs J2 4499 AKM edition, going into the Outlaw monoblocks. Very affordable, well, somewhat affordable monoblocks. Come in at $399, so $800 a pair for a set of monoblocks. Reason I used those amplifiers is because, well, they put out a ton of power. So I didn't have to worry about underpowering these speakers. I also listened to them around 75 dB because, well, they both don't do very well above 85 dB, and the Sonus Fabers do better than the Sonys. So I wanted to give the Sonys a little bit of grace and not play them super, super loud. We have to keep our expectations in check when it comes to the bass on either of these speakers. They both have a stated roll-off of 55 Hz for the Sonus Faber and 53 Hz for the Sonys. Although the Sonus Fabers hit a little bit harder. The Sonys are no slouch though. They hit 2. But you have to keep the volume pretty low when it comes to stuff like Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys, because that comes in around 80 to 100 Hertz. A lot of excursion, and you could blow up a speaker. You could blow up either one of these speakers, but the Sonus Faber were a lot more composed with louder bass. Bass texture, though, bit of a different story. Miles Davis, so what? The Sonys were very articulate, very quick, very airy on the bottom. Not as airy as the Sonus Faber, but they weren't embarrassed. You can push the Sonus Fabers a lot further, but you probably don't want to anyway. For both of these speakers, if you're running them as your main left and right channels, I would probably implement a high-pass filter, which you can do with the Weem Ultra, and then just fill in the bottom end with the subwoofer. As far as bass goes, the Sonus Faber, not 10 times better. Not 2 times better. Better? Yes, but I wouldn't even say they're twice as good. There will be time. Mumford & Sons. I get a lot of hate because people don't like Mumford & Sons, but I do, and that's all that really matters. Mumford & Sons, male vocals, articulate, baritone, lovely on both speakers. However, with the Sonys, and I never really heard this before because I kind of listen to the Sonys in a vacuum. I don't do a ton of back and forth A/B testing with the Sonys and other speakers. And if I do that, generally they're both playing in pairs on their own, playing mono music through one speaker. I noticed something on the Sonys I've never noticed before, and that it was a little bit hollow in the mid-range. While there was baritone there, they weren't even close to being as good as the Sonus Fabers. I felt like maybe the enclosure construction of the Sonus Faber was knocking down a bunch of this weird, somewhat resonance that I heard in the Sonys. Female vocals better on the Sonys, still not nearly as good as the Sonus Faber. I listened to Creep, the cover by Lena Hall, which is an amazing song, and if you haven't heard it, you really should listen to it. The Sonys actually had a little bit more spice, a little bit more edge when she really went up in the register than the Sonus Faber, and it was better on female vocals than it was on male vocals. I felt like for the first time I heard a bit of a scoop in the mid-range on the Sonys compared to the Sonus Faber. Mid-range, 5 times better on the Sonus Faber. Harvester of Sorrow. We're talking about treble here, and the cymbals, although prominent and available not in your face, but apparent on the Sonys, were a little bit flat, maybe a little bit sizzly in comparison to the Sonus Faber. They sounded like white noise piped in at the right frequency at the right time, so very truncated, so not nearly as natural. The treble, the cymbal crashes on the Sonus Faber felt realistic. They hung out. There was separation between the rest of the instrumentation. Just sounded way more natural on the Sonus Faber. The cool thing about the Sonys is that they give you a little bit of spice, though. So, again, in a vacuum, if you're not comparing them to a speaker that costs 10 times as much, you're not going to notice that unnatural top end. They're just going to sound exciting. Treble goes to the Sonus Faber. I would say 7 times better on the Sonus Faber. I'm just making things up, just pulling stuff out of the ethos. Okay, what are my final thoughts? Final thoughts. Are the Sonus Faber 10 times better than the Sonys? Well, you're going to have to hang out for about another minute or two. I think the Sonys are a spectacular speaker. This is the first time I really heard their limitations when I was quickly doing an A/B test. However, you need to take into consideration that test was in mono. The Sonys aren't meant to play in mono. They're meant to play in stereo. And in stereo, with a little bit of time between listening to the Sonus Faber and listening to the Sonys, the delta, the difference in sound, shrinks a lot because our brains will fill in a little bit of the inadequacies or ineptitude of the Sonys. What I did hear for the first time today, though, is a lot of mid-range issues with the Sonys when you compare it to a speaker costing 10 times as much, a very well-respected speaker brand in Sonus Faber. The only place where the Sonys somewhat competed was in bass, not in quantity, but in quality. Mid-range, the Sonus Faber were a lot more balanced, didn't have any dips or troughs that were easily heard. The Sonys actually sounded almost a little bit hollow at times in direct comparison. The timbre or tonality or realistic quality of the treble, much better on the Sonus Faber. Build quality, of course, much better on the Sonus Faber. If I had to say overall, how much better is the Sonus Faber than the Sonys? If we're putting multiples on it, I would say the Sonus Faber is 5 to 6 times better than the Sonys when comparing them directly to the Sonys A/B. And who's going to be doing that besides me? In a vacuum, I think that the Sonys are going to give you 60% of what the Sonus Faber gives you. They're not going to compete on overall presentation, tonality, realism, instrument separation, soundstage, although the soundstage on the Sonys was actually pretty good. They get a little bit harsh on top, the Sonys. They get a little bit hollow in the mid-range. But if $150 is what you can afford right now, don't despair, because the Sonys are an absolutely awesome experience for $150. If you can swing it, if you can find a pair of Sonus Faber Lumina 2 Amateurs on sale for less than $1,500, I would get them. I have purchased both of these speakers. The Sonys I've probably purchased 5 times. The Sonus Faber I've purchased 1 time because they're expensive. They're both spectacular, but the Sonus Fabers are way, way better. So if you want to be part of the best hi-fi community on the planet, you should sign up for my Patreon, patreon.com/cheapaudioman. We have Patreon-only Zooms, Patreon-only Discord, Patreon-only Facebook group. If you want to check out these speakers, I will link them in the description. The Sonys will definitely be an affiliate link, which means if you click and you buy, I get a commission. It doesn't cost you anymore, though, so it's a great way to support the channel. The Sonus Faber, I don't think is an affiliate link. I'll link him to Audio Advice. Maybe Audio Advice. I think you can get him there.